Hey guys, I learned something today that's going to be a game changer, not only for me, but for you guys with your own podcast growth strategy. And I've been in podcasting a long time. So this was actually quite a revelation to me. It helped explain why some things have worked for me and why other things have not. And today we're going to be deep diving into that growth strategy. And there's one term that I want to just share with you guys that was just unreal. So, and you guys know I record these intros after the podcast just for this reason. So Kevin shared something with us today. So he said, don't promote, participate. Now, I'm excited to deep dive into that and everything else with Kevin here today. So a little bit on Kevin. Kevin Chemidlin is the founder of Grow the Show. He's a personal friend. We spent quite a bit of time together at different events. He's just honestly like one of the best all around people that I know. And I'm so excited for this episode. But he said, hey, can I come on and talk about this with your audience? I said, oh my gosh, yes. Because you guys have pretty much only gotten my opinion on growing a podcast, which hopefully you feel like is great. But Kevin brings a really incredible insight to you guys. And I'm very excited to share him with you here on the episode today. So with that, let's hop right in. Are you a speaker looking to make a bigger impact and reach a broader audience? If so, it's time to elevate your game with PitchDB. It's the ultimate platform for speakers, and it helps you discover hundreds of speaking opportunities in just a few clicks. With PitchDB, you can catapult your speaking career to new heights, reach the right people, and get on stages that can truly build your brand. Don't be a great speaker that nobody knows. Be a great speaker everyone wants to hear. For your own free month of PitchDB, head on over to pantheon.fm/pitch. Once again, that's pantheon.fm/pitch. All right, man. I'm very excited about this one. This is going to be a really good episode. I think a lot of people, when they come into the podcasting world, think that there's a lot of artificial ways to grow a podcast. And so people are constantly on the look for the hacks or whatever to grow a show. But what I love about your brand, it's called Grow the Show. PS, guys who are listening to this, it's really about building through really good organic methods and through paid methods, but building content in a way that actually attracts people. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's about content that's good. What I've found is that a lot of podcasters and entrepreneurs think they have a growth problem.
Yeah.
But really what they have is a show problem.
In layman's terms, your content sucks. And that's okay. Because you can
I
get
didn't say
better.
it. Josh said it.
I'll say it. Your content sucks. And it can always get better, right? I know for myself, I've interviewed 2,000 people over almost a decade now. And I still constantly listen to myself. I go, oh my gosh, you can improve here, you can improve there. Anyways. So let's talk that though. So like you're talking about growing the show kind of by solving really the root issue, yes, which is creating good content. So let's start there and then we'll unpack it from there.
Yeah, totally. So I always talk about there's really 4 levels to getting a podcast, where you want it to be. And for most of us entrepreneurs, we want it to, number 1, be growing our audience, growing our reach. And then number 2, we want it to be bringing us customers, right? Bringing us ROI. And so the first level of that, I call it the podcast ladder. The first level is having what I call a clear, unique premise, CUP, clear, unique premise. And what that basically means is if someone looks at your show, if they pull out their phone, they look at your podcast, are they instantly going to know what the show is about? And most importantly, what they're going to get out of the show, right? And so I see a lot entrepreneurs will start a podcast and they'll kind of monkey see, monkey do a little bit and just like make their show look exactly like Josh's show, right? Or make it just like another classic, like I'm going to interview entrepreneurs about their success stories. And I actually, there's a podcaster that I'm working with now who that's exactly what she did. She owns a bookkeeping agency where, her company provides bookkeeping services. And she came to me and she's like, my show is called Entrepreneur Money Stories, where we interview entrepreneurs about their money mindset. And I was like, okay, great. So you're like helping people understand how to think with abundance and right, like you're telling stories of how entrepreneurs learn to love money. And she's like, oh no, I want my podcast to teach entrepreneurs how to look at their business financials and make great business decisions. I was like, that is not what comes across when I look at your podcast. Like,
you're like, I listened, doesn't happen for me.
Yeah, that's not what it is. And so instead, I said, okay, look, let's rename the show and let's say that while we're talking about what you just told me, let's talk about that. And so she renamed the show to Business by the Books. That's all you need, right? At that point, you just need the title. And that's the first little hack is with your podcast title, ideally should be self-explanatory, as self-explanatory as it can be. If you have to be there to explain to the person, well, this is what that means, then you're just not going to get 100% of the potential people. So that's the first step, is
Right.
like having clarity with what are people going to get if they listen to you every single week.
And I'll throw this out there too, because like my show, it's called The Lucky Titan, for crying out loud. You don't even know what the heck it's about, right? The only reason we've kept it this way for this long is because we built so much brand equity around it. It finally started working, right?
100%.
But we always had to tell people what it was about versus it just being obvious. Like truthfully, if I were to restart this show, I would literally call it Marketing Tips with Josh Tapp. That's literally all it would be.
Right. And you would, like, at that point, so many more people, even today, who are looking, and you, of course, don't change the name because it's such a stalwart now. But, if somebody saw that, they'd be like, oh yeah, I could use some marketing tips. Right. And it reduces the friction out of the gate. It's like,
Right.
it's kind of like, those race cars, when they stop, they like throw up a huge parachute behind them and it like slows them down.
Right.
Well, I like to say that having a really vague, not unique premise where people really don't understand what it is like having that parachute behind your podcast. It's keeping it from going fast.
Right. I think pretty much everybody knows Mr. Beast. Yeah. I was looking at his channel just the other day because I always do research on creators. I just love to see what they're doing. I'm going to encourage you guys, go look at his YouTube channel. Just look at the main page of the channel. And it's like, it's so interesting because his is like subscribe for a cookie. He's like he's built such an empire on this. Like his brand converts. But then there's this other channel I really love called How Ridiculous, which they're not as well known as he is. And I can't remember the exact line. It was so funny. It's How Ridiculous. They're literally just like dropping stuff from high heights. That's pretty much all they do. Yeah. And it's like, or they smash stuff. But they have like 40 million subscribers or something to that tune. And their tagline is like 5 crazy Aussies doing American things or something like that. And awesome. I'm like, that is so funny that it's like, that's all it took. It's like 5 or 6 words. I can't remember the exact line. I wish I did, but it was so impactful. I'm like, I need to do that to my show.
Yeah.
Right? Make it super simple.
And what you're getting at is what I call a podcast tagline. It's the like 10 words that come right after the name. And so if you have a clear name and then pair it with a tagline like that, that's very simple. Like my podcast is called Grow the Show. Again, self-explanatory. If you listen to it, you're going to grow the show. So the tagline is the podcast that grows your podcast. At that point, I don't need a description. You don't need to know who I am as the host. You don't need to know. I mean, yes, of course, you're like, well, why should I listen to this guy? But that's enough to get a stranger to press play. And that's step one.
Right. Well, I don't want to get like too far down this rabbit hole, but I'm just kind of curious because like the tactics you're talking about is really about getting the click, right? Getting them to stick is a way other ball game, right? And I'm assuming that's where you're going next, but like, how do you get them to where they're actually like playing through, right? That playthrough is actually extremely valuable.
100%. That's literally step 2, which is keep the listeners that you get. Every podcaster thinks they have a growth problem, but in reality, in most cases, they have a retention problem. Exactly.
100%.
My favorite example, my buddy Nate had a podcast. He still does, but it's called Low Carb Hustle. Great premise, right? Great name. You listen to his show, he's going to talk about how to live a low carb lifestyle and have 6-pack.
Right.
You would now this guy was, when I met him in September of 22, I think, he was throwing every single podcast growth strategy at his show that you could imagine. He was running paid spend. He was going on podcasts. He was doing social clips, like you name it. And his show was stuck at 12,000 downloads per month, which it's pretty impressive.
It's a good number.
But it is. But given his premise has a huge potential target audience and all of the work he was putting into growing the show, it really should have been higher. And so he said, dude, what the heck? And I said, all right, let me listen. Let me press play. I pressed play. And it was like, hey, welcome to Low Carb Hustle. I'm your boy, Nate. I'm here with my boy, Juicy Cheeks. Juicy Cheeks, how was your week? And I'm like, okay, who's Juicy Cheeks? Who is Nate? I don't care about, I don't care about how Juicy Cheeks' week was, right? I was like, dude, you're losing everyone immediately. And so we looked at his completion rates, which is, if you're not sure, if you have a podcast and you're not sure if you're keeping listeners, open up the Apple Podcasts analytics dashboard and just look at your completion rate on each episode. We want to see, with guest episodes, we want to see around 60% or more. If it's a solo episode, we want to see 80% or more. Nate had 20% completion rates, which means on average, these, like, 3,000 people were listening to 20% of his episode and turning it off. Like, they pull out their phone and they turn it off. I was like, Nate, my buddy, you don't have a growth problem. You have a retention problem. All he did was fix his intro. That was it. Instead of just like starting and being like, hey, what's up? How was your week? Let's chat. Let's be cool. He would start an episode and he'd be like, hey, have you ever tried intermittent fasting? Well, you may have run into this problem. In this episode, we're going to dive into how XYZ. Stick around. That's it. 30 seconds. Within 3 months, his show had tripled to 36,000 per month. And about 6 months after that, he had surpassed 75,000 downloads per month. So all he did was learn how to keep the listeners that he was getting. And you can probably surmise from what I'm saying that a lot of that work is done in just literally the first 10%, the first minute and a half of every episode. Because if you can get him to put the phone away, then you're good, right? Then
Right.
people will generally listen. And in a case like that, where he was already crushing all the growth tactics, then his show overnight, quote unquote, blew up. But
Right.
again, like for podcasters who don't have retention, I'd be like, look, I can get you 1 million downloads tomorrow. Next week, you'll be back to where you are right now because you can't keep the listeners that you get.
Right. Because the content wasn't good.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Because even just changing the intro, and I'm gonna throw this as a shout out for you guys because that was a really good tip. So it's you just go to iTunes, yes, and you find your show, you log into iTunes, yes, as the podcast owner, and it will show you your completion rate. Yes.
Yeah. It's called Apple Podcasts Connect. So if you just Google Apple Podcasts Connect, you log in with your Apple ID, and you can see the metrics, and you can see how you're doing.
Love it. I actually didn't know they had that data, so I'm writing that down because I don't think they used to.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm like surprised. There's a lot of big shows that don't ever check and most shows don't know about it, don't ever look. But in my mind, it's literally the vital sign of a show.
It is.
If a show has high completion rates, that is a growable show.
That's the reason we moved to YouTube is because YouTube shows us all that data. So it's like, and I still think YouTube's a big thing, which we'll talk about later. But point being is that's actually super helpful data. Because like you said, like downloads don't matter. Reviews are important. But like if they're not listening to the entire thing, what's the point? Right?
Exactly. Why are we doing this?
Right. And you know, what's interesting about that too, though, and I want to kind of get your take on this. You've heard about like speaking in sound bites, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm still working on that. I'm having a really hard time doing that. Do you have any like tips on how to do better at that, or is that not your area of expertise?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't have like a framework behind that. I think what I've just learned is having said the same things over and over again, every once in a while, I'll say it one way and people's eyes go, oh, did you come up with that? And I'm like, okay, I'm putting that in my pocket. I'm going to say it like that from now on.
Now I came up with that. So give it your best shot. And then you're going to go, I'm the best, man. I know what I'm doing.
Right, exactly. And then with time, it's like at this point, Tony Robbins has like the same like 6 things that blow people's minds. And he just says them on every podcast interview. So you just kind of, you accumulate them with time. That's my take anyway.
Oh, I agree. It's, you're actually working with him, Joseph Giglietti, right? He has like a whole thing he calls bits. It's a bits framework around this. He calls them bits because they're little like 30-second to minutes like stories that feed to a point. And he has like something absurd, like 147 of them. And I've been like writing mine down because I have a ton of them. But I was like, I don't think I've even passed 25. I'm going, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I need to either increase those or refine the ones I have. So
totally,
because I say the same crap every time because it's like, well, the truth is the truth is the truth. So you can like it or not. Anyway, so speaking in bites and creating content, right, is like about, and I should probably explain this to people who are listening to this if you're not a podcaster. Speaking in sound bites means basically creating content, having an interview like this in a way that we can cut clips out of it without having to do a lot of work. Because I've been trying to figure it out. This has been something I've been really trying to master with this show. And all I can really think, like all I've really learned with it is that you start by saying, this is what I'm going to do. You explain it in like 10 to 30 seconds. And then you end by saying, this is what I'm going to do, because then it can loop the content, right?
Yeah.
So you can turn it as one of those looping reels. Yeah. And those are converting really well. So I was just kind of curious.
The other thing that comes up for me is that has worked really well is like, if you ask me a question, and I might have done it so far in this conversation, but you might be like, what does a podcaster need to know in order to grow? Instead of saying, well, they need to know this, I would say the number one thing a podcaster needs to know in order to grow is, and so I'd like repeat the question back to you as a statement, and then it becomes way more clippable.
That's so unique, actually. I love that. We're going to try that here in a minute, but I'm going to make
so next question you ask me, I'll give you an example.
Like we're going to practice this live on air, but the problem is now you've got my brain going and I'm going to get lost in my own head. So, but dude, that's freaking awesome. So kind of recapping here, right? So we're talking about changing the intros, making sure that the title and the description are all really good. So you're getting the click is the first part.
Yep.
the second part would be I just figured out how I'm going to ask this question. People are seeing this real time. But
Nice.
the second part being like speaking in bits and creating really good meaty content. The third thing, like my big question would be is distribution and discoverability, right?
Yep.
Because everybody I know who starts a podcast, they go out and they try to get on every platform, and then they try to grow on every platform. So what's your number one tip that you'd recommend somebody who is trying to get better distribution on their podcast?
Yeah. So any podcaster who wants to grow their podcast in 2024 needs to remember one thing. Crap. I'm thinking about it too.
We'll try again. It's okay.
Yeah. So, okay. There's really 3 ways to grow a podcast audience in 2024, right? You can kind of think of it as pick one and go all in on that one and get it to work instead of trying to get all of them to work all at once.
Right.
And with the shows, with the creators that I have seen who I had one person go from 0 to 1 million downloads in literally 3 months, which sounds ridiculous. And it was the point where like it happened and she showed me her screenshots and I got on a call with her. I'm like, can you explain to me how this works? Because this is bigger than I could even expect. And I'm the grow your podcast guy. And so the 3 main ways that I see working are podcast guesting, organic social media. So learning how to create social media content that is good. And there's a one thing to remember when it comes to that, and YouTube, as you said it. Yep. Every podcaster that I saw grow their audience in a huge way in 2023 got really good at one of those 3 things.
Right. Getting super, super dialed in. By the way, that was awesome. We're going to totally make that a soundbite.
Nice.
And we're going to include the mess up so people go, we're real, man. We're real people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I was like messing it up in my head too. I'm like, we'll get there. I'm eventually going to get good at this, guys. Just watch. At one point, you're all going to be listening to this. Yeah, people are going to listen to this and go, he just did that. Like, yeah, I did.
Yep.
I expect you guys to shout me out on that. But I love that because it's picking a single platform that's going to convert well. And I'll actually tell you, because like we had a whole agency growing podcasts, right? And we edited or we like did the production and all this, but we actually focused on distribution. And people thought it was rocket science. And I'm like, guys, it's super simple. We go out and we have an army of people talk about your show. That's what we do. So we pay affiliates to go out. We'd pay them to go out and everybody go watch the show and leave a review. If they do that, we got onto the charts. Getting on the charts allows more people to discover you. But the shows that always did the best were the ones that figured out this retention problem, right? Because I'm like, we can get you out there, but your content sucks.
Exactly.
And so I think what you're doing is a game changer for people, because what's weird is that it can literally be an overnight success thing, right? By just tweaking that difference. Because I know for myself, we had, I think it was 5 VAs. All they did was go out and they would talk about my show. Like they'd engage with people in community. So it looked like I was super active online. And all they would do is they would communicate with these people. I would be the one to give them the responses and things like this so that they could talk to people. But they're like, hey, would love to have your support on the show. Check it out and let us know. If you hate it, let me know, because I want to change it. Right? I want to make sure I change it. And just doing that language, we went from, I think, $40,000 or $50,000 a month up to like $600,000 a month by just going like that one tweak, right?
Yeah.
And it was because the retention drastically increased, right? So anyways, just
what I'd also add is that the number one thing to remember if you want to grow your podcast audience from social media is this: don't promote, participate. So everyone's thinking, how can I use social media to promote my podcast episodes? And when you're thinking that, what you do is you go onto LinkedIn or you go onto Instagram or Facebook groups or whatever, and you post a crappy headshot of the guest that you interviewed this week. And you're like, new episode now. It was my honor to chat with Josh Tapp this week. Link in bio. And here's the thing. That is not good social media content. Nobody wants to see that post in their feed. So they scroll past it faster than they even can see it. And then the platform is like, oh, nobody likes this. Let's not show this post to anybody. So if you're a podcaster who's making those posts like, hey, everyone, check out my podcast, and it's getting no likes, no reach, that is why. It's because that is objectively not good social media content. But if instead of using social media to promote your podcast episodes, you instead use your podcast episodes to participate on social media, that's when you start to get organic reach on social media. And what I mean by that is, instead of, like, we love to cut clips. And what we've been talking about today is we've been trying to engineer ways that we can cut clips. But what we're doing is talking in ways that makes for good short form videos. right? Now we're doing it in a way that makes it easy for us. Like we can just quickly cut it. But the reason why it will work is because somebody will see a video that has a great beginning, a great middle, and a great end. It is objectively a good video. And if somebody
Right.
saw that video and saw nothing else that I said ever again, they'd be like, man, I'm really glad that I saw that video. That taught me something. And so the same thing is true if you do what I call summary content, which is where you take your podcast episode, you can use a little bit of AI to help make this happen. And if you're on Twitter, you post a Twitter thread with, hey, I chatted with Josh Tapp this week. Here's 3 things that I learned. Or if you're on LinkedIn, you can do a carousel or a text post. Hey, same thing. Chatted with Josh Tapp this week. Here's 3 things that I learned. What do you think about this? And you use the insights generated in your podcast episode to make social media posts that participate. You did the same thing with your VAs. You had VAs participating on your behalf on social media. And then people were like, oh, this guy's cool. I want to check out his show. That's
Right.
the number one thing to remember is just don't promote, participate.
Dude, that is so freaking impactful. And I want to ask you this. What's one simple thing that they could go do to participate? Because pretty much everybody listening to this show has a podcast, right? Or a YouTube channel or whatever.
Yep.
What is like a low hanging fruit 3 to 5 minute activity they can go do specifically to participate with their next podcast episode?
Yeah. So it's just what I just described, which is the last podcast episode that you had, or maybe you could do this right at the end, like an interview is done when it's fresh in your mind. Just ask yourself, what's one thing that I learned in this interview? That's one thing that I learned, right? And then just fire up your social media app. You can do this text only. You don't need an image. You don't need a video. And you just say, here's one thing I learned about podcast growth today. And you can do this, right? On LinkedIn, be like,
I'm going to go do it right after this.
Right,
I'm going to go test the thesis. You guys can see the post.
Right. You're like, I learned something today that's going to change my podcast growth strategy. So you have one sentence hook. Don't promote, participate. If you use social media to promote yourself, nobody will like it. If instead you use your podcast to participate in the town square that is social media, you're going to get more reach. What do you think? Have you ever tried this? That's your post. Now watch how many more likes and comments and shares that gets compared to a picture of my face.
It's a beautiful face, but we
I appreciate it, but let's be real.
He's like, I'm not Ryan Gosling here. I don't look like him now. I don't know if everybody told you that.
Maybe you can put a picture of my face. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'll put Ryan Gosling's face.
There you go. Just use his face.
That's good copyright infringement. That'd be a great way to get knocked out of here. That's awesome. Dude, that's so powerful though. And I'm totally going to go steal that post. I'm going to re-listen to this and write that down because I started to write and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to keep up with this. But that was powerful. We have a shared, like a mutual friend, Katie Brinkley, right? She talks about her 4-post strategy, which I think is pretty brilliant. I'm trying to get her to come on the show and actually talk about that. But in essence, it's that true starting conversations. Because you and I are about the same age, yeah? You're in your 30s, yeah?
Oh,
okay,
yeah,
okay.
I am.
So like our generation was actually raised on forums before social media happened, right? So like Reddit and places like this. And the beautiful thing about places like Reddit is that you can post a question or a prompt and you can get instant feedback on if it works, right? And social media has almost felt different to me where like you can do that, but then they're prioritizing video this month or they're prioritizing imaging this month. So you have to like play the game a little bit to get that engagement. But then you look at people like Joe Rogan, right? This guy records like 4-hour episodes and they just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And I ask people this all the time. Like, when was the last time, if you're a Joe Rogan fan, that you actually watched an entire episode of Joe Rogan? And people constantly like, well, I just listened to one the other day. I'm like, okay, how many have you listened to in the last 30 days? Oh, well, one. The dude produces a ton of content. So it's like, you're not seeing that, but I'm like, but if you ask me how many YouTube shorts I've consumed of this guy and actually engaged with, I mean, hundreds a month, hundreds of them. And just because I like watching his stuff, I think he's brilliant. So, but point being is like, I'm kind of curious because he hasn't really needed to do that because he's already had that celebrity image, right?
Yeah.
But I'm kind of curious to see like if something like this would convert the same way, right?
So, yeah, what I can say, looking at the data from the folks that I've worked directly with, is that first of all, you can generally expect that about 10 to 20% of your total audience is tuning into your podcast on a regular basis. And because I've done surveys of my own audience, I've done surveys of my clients' audiences, and a lot of them, the people who are not tuning in on a regular basis, love the show, they still recommend it. But if you think about your behavior as a podcast listener, you kind of, just like you described, you might listen to one episode of your favorite show this month, and 3 of the episodes, you're like, I don't really know. And you kind of come in and out, right? And then a couple months go by, you don't listen to it. Then you're like, oh, wait, I haven't checked out Joe Rogan's show in a while. And you go binge a few episodes. So that's kind of what it is. But a lot of podcasters, they fixate on their downloads per episode. And if they have 1,000 downloads per episode, they're like, my audience is 1,000. I need it to grow. I've got news. There's a good chance your audience is actually around 10,000. And another thing is that I've also extensively surveyed my audiences. I've had multiple podcasts of my own, and I always ask them, number one, how often do you listen to the show? And the answer is always basically what we described. Is like, usually, I recommend it all the time. I binge, I come in and out. But the other thing is that I always ask, how many total episodes of my podcast have you listened to? And I'm always surprised to see that the answer is usually between 4 and 6 episodes. And that's just across the board. And so we tend to think of our audience as this like pond, right? Of these just like 1,000 people who are sitting in the theater and consume everything that we do. When in actuality, it's more of a river. People kind of flow in and out, and that's okay. It's just something to understand about the way your audience works. So how that relates to social media is when you're putting out shorts that are good, by the way, it's not just crappy clips that are posted. They are objectively good videos. Your social media audience will grow. Your followers will grow. And also the people who just know who you are. There will be people who know your face, know your value. They may not follow you, but it's truly growing your brand where people are like, oh yeah, Kevin's the podcast guy. Oh yeah, Josh is the podcast guy, right? And while your podcast downloads may not have exploded, your overall reach really, really has. So I don't know. That's just my thoughts on like the conversion doesn't happen right away. I know a lot of people who have gotten tons of reach on Reels and they're like, this hasn't translated to any downloads. And I'm like, okay, first of all, it's not going to be one-to-one because watching a 60-second video is very different from listening to your hour-long podcast episode.
No joke.
But also, all we have to do is make sure that within your social media, you are talking about your show. You are every once in a while saying, hey, you should check out my podcast. And there's a way that you can do it. I know I just said, don't promote. There's a way that you can do it in a, that's depth that people welcome, like you figured out with the VAs. And so you pepper in the right CTAs to send people to the show while also not expecting every reel to translate directly to downloads. And with time, you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting 10,000 downloads a month. That's crazy.
Right. Yeah. And that's so interesting. Yeah. Social media has been a nut that we haven't really cracked ourselves. We've gotten some pretty decent reach, but it's never affected our revenue. But I'm almost questioning. I was not expecting this today. So good work, Kevin. But nice. I was not expecting to go, we might be missing out on a lot of money opportunities because we have a pretty dang good conversion rate from our podcast. But I'm almost wonder if we could just, it's like the number you said, right? It was like your listenership might actually be like 10 times what an individual episode is receiving. And you just don't realize it because they're just not consuming it frequently enough. And that's what I always tell people with social media as a tool anyways. I just tell them the goal of social media is to remind them to go look at your show. It doesn't even matter what it is, right? Like you can post anything you want. And that's just the Josh philosophy. But some people have really tapped into that and made it amazing because we usually do around 5 pieces of content per episode and it's just dripped out over 6 months. Right. Wow. But, we did that for a long time. And then recently, almost nothing. And it's weird because my numbers didn't drop and it made me go, I guess it's probably just because that's just a reminder for them. Yeah. Right, to come back.
One of my early clients and a friend, his name is Brian Lubin. He's got a show called the Action Academy, and he's gone from 0 to, he's got 250K on Instagram, and his show's crushing it. He's built a whole 7-figure business around his show. And I saw him do an Instagram poll recently on his story, and he said, when is the last time you listened to my podcast? Or how often you listen to my podcast or something like that. There were 3 options. It was, I listen to every episode, sometimes, and I didn't know you had a podcast. 65% of people said, I didn't know you had a podcast. And he blew his mind. He's like, what? I'm doing all this social media stuff. And he kept telling me, he's like, I can't, my show is stuck. I don't know what's going on here. Whereas he had, what's 65% of 250,000, right? That many people followed him on social, liked his videos, knew who he was. Some even bought his stuff, didn't know that he had a show. So, what we're touching on here is the yin and yang of not over promoting yourself, but also understanding that people don't know what you do and what you have as much as you think they do.
Right. I think the easiest way to gauge that too, just with what I've seen, go start a community. right? If you're trying to get people to attend a call, like a phone call, you have to communicate with them 6 times a day to get them to show up to one call. It's insanity, especially if it's not added to their calendar. And so I'm like looking at that going, and those are people who know me. They've paid me. They're like, yeah.
They asked for the call.
They're like, they wanted it. Yeah, they're paying me for the call and they don't even know what's happening. Yeah. Because literally just this morning we had that happen. I was like, oh my gosh, like hardly anybody came to the call. And I went, we literally sent like 3 emails, 3 texts, went on Telegram, posted about it. It's like hardly anybody showed up. They're like, I didn't know we had a call today. I'm like, how is this possible?
Right. But it's true.
Oh man, that's so interesting. Anyways, so I am going to just kind of wrap this up though, but hopefully kind of doing it in a nice way here, is that I have seen, at least for us, one of the best ways to get people to engage on the podcast is actually to engage with them in other ways. So, inviting them to events or, putting on calls or whatever it is, right? Like getting them to actually meet you drastically increases their stick rate. At least I've seen. So, I mean, we always do a ton of events for that. We just did one a couple weeks ago. And that, I mean, we spent 5 days just with people and had a really incredible experience with them. But all those people are like, I didn't know you had a show. I didn't know you had a show. And these are my clients. And I'm going, wow, that's interesting. So it just kind of like sinks the point home. But it leads me, it was a very poor transition, but that leads me right into the event that you're running, Kevin. Because I'm really excited about this one, man. When you reached out to me, you're like, let's do an episode about this. I want to promote this event. I was excited because I go, man, I hope people have seen the value that you provide, even just in this, whatever it's been, 20 minutes, 30 minutes here. But give us a little bit of insight into what this event that you're putting on.
Yeah, sure. So it's called Grow the Show Live. It's my first time ever doing an event like this. Super, super excited. And basically, thank you. Yeah, so it's for CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs who podcast on behalf of their business and to grow their personal brand. And it's going to be 5 days. And the goal is to dive way deeper. I mean, I've just touched on the surface of the framework that we have at Grow the Show for how to make, grow, and monetize a great show. We call it the podcast ladder. And so we're going to dive into that, how to have a clear premise. Number 1, how to retain listeners. What are the tactics to make that happen? Yes, of course. How do you grow? How do you execute those 3 strategies that are working right now? And then finally, the most important thing, right? How do you make money from it? How do you get podcast ROI? And spoiler alert, the secret is you convert your listeners to buyers of your stuff or of someone else's stuff, aka sponsors. So we're going to dive into how to make that happen, how to max that out as well. And so Grow the Show Live.
Dude, that's freaking cool. And I'm going to make a plug here for those of you who maybe haven't gotten on the long form content bandwagon. We can directly tie over $50 million in deals directly to my podcast. And people look at that and they're like, okay, yeah. And I'm like, no, like literally the revenue has been directly tied to it. And it's not just the listenership, it's the guests and the relationships that we're building. And so I look at what you're doing with this and I'm going, you're literally offering people a $50 million opportunity, right? Yeah, man. At least that's as far as my brain can comprehend at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe it's $1 billion opportunity. I'll let you know in 2 years when I hit $1 billion, right?
100%. No, but you're absolutely right, man. It's totally true. And I just listener, you hearing my voice right now, think about how you feel about Josh. You listen to all his episodes, you're like, that dude's awesome, right? Well, what we're aiming to do with Grow the Show is to make your audience feel that way about you. That's it.
Yeah. And I am here to be proof that you don't have to be good at it to have an audience. So I am working every day and I think about you guys every day. So I appreciate that shout, Kevin. So where can people go to register for the event?
Yeah. So growtheshowlive.com/Pantheon, pretty simple. So I'm sure the link will be in the show notes.
Absolutely.
And April 1st through the 5th. Would love to have you there.
So good, dude. So guys, growtheshow.com/Pantheon, which you guys don't remember how to spell that. I'm going to be embarrassed for you, but it's PANTHEON. So make sure you guys go check that out. Go register for this event. I believe it's a paid ticket. Yes. $97.
Yes, that's right. $97. Yep.
And I can tell you guys right now, that should get you excited to go because that means there's curation and that's actually going to be a really solid room. So great place to go network, great place to go learn from the master himself. So Kevin, again, man, thanks for hopping in. This was an awesome episode. I took a lot away from it.
Honor's mine, man. Thank you so much.
You bet.